Hello and welcome to episode 46 of the world's first Paul Weller fan podcast. I'm Dan Jennings, and 10 years ago I gave up my live streaming career as a radio presenter with one big regret: never getting to interview my hero, the legendary British musician Paul Weller. This podcast exists purely to solve that issue. Welcome to Desperately Seeking Paul. This week my guest is Dave Swift. Since joining Jools Holland and his Rhythm and Blues Orchestra in 1991, Dave has established himself as one of the UK's finest, high-profile bass players. In his career, which expands beyond 3 decades now, he boasts a musician's portfolio that seconds no other. Playing with an array of renowned artists from George Benson and Chaka to Hall & Oates, Ray Davies, Ringo Starr, Jimmy Cliff, Brian Ferry, Paul Young, Paul Simon, Paul McCartney, and, of course, the main man, another Paul, Mr. Paul Weller. Dave has got to perform with Paul on plenty of occasions on TV and live in concert, with some pretty iconic moments and some fabulous recordings for albums and singles in the mix as well. So let's get into it. Dave Swift, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking.
You have been there, part of the team for some of Paul's most loved TV performances over the past 30 years, and some of the ones that have properly gone viral and made a really big splash. So we're going to get into that and talk about that. And also, you're a key part of one of my favourite TV shows ever, which we'll touch on in a sec too. I'm not sure if you can guess which one. Go on. Any ideas?
It's not Jools Holland, is it?
Well, it is that one. Actually, yes, that's the obvious one, but there is another one too, but we'll touch on that in a sec. Kick things off. When was it you first discovered the music of Paul Weller?
It would have when I was a kid, and I never wanted to be a musician, I hasten to add. You know, when I was at school, I took up the trombone it was just a bit of fun, really. Both my brothers played guitar, and, you know, it was like a musical household in the fact that I was listening to their albums and whatever, but I never wanted to be a musician. But I did take up the trombone, which I loved when I was 14. And then I took up the bass guitar and the double bass when I was 15. I was still at school. And I was self-taught as a bass player. So I was watching things like Top of the Pops and the Old Grey Whistle Test and whatever I could find to, you know, help me sort of learn to play and stuff. So obviously the Jam were a big thing at the time. You know, they were all over our TV screens. So, and I remember being very taken with the song Start, very cool bass line to it. And I remember learning that very early on. So that's probably the beginning of my association with Paul was from that and watching him on TV a lot.
And how much did you follow his career through the Jam and the Breakup and then the Style Council? Were you close to that music, or was it not really your bag at the time?
I really did like the Jam. I was probably more into, at that time, I was more probably into like the two-tone stuff, you know. So, and I think because I was a trombone player as well, and a lot of those two-tone bands had horn sections, you know, so I was big like sort of the Specials and Madness and all that kind of thing. But yeah, I definitely was, anytime they came on TV, anytime sort of Paul and the Jam came on TV, I would definitely watch them. The Style Council I was probably into a little bit more, because I guess that was closer to the music that I was really into. And of course, the great thing about the Style Council was that it featured Mick Tolbert as well, who ended up playing in Jools Holland's band as well.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Mick has depped for Jools, because Jools' brother Chris is our organ player, and Chris has had to miss sort of gigs and tours for various reasons. So Mick Tolbert was always brought in. So not only sort of getting to sort of meet and play with Paul further down the line, it was Mick as well. So yeah, I probably was more aware of the Style Council stuff than the Jam. And it was probably just because that music was a bit more connection. But yeah, I love the Jam. And again, I just remember seeing him on TV so much as a kid and avidly watching it whenever those guys came on.
So you mentioned that you didn't set out to be a musician. That wasn't your thoughts and career path. So how did that change? At some point, presumably it did.
Yeah, I think I just got unlucky. Well, no, it was odd because, you know, both my parents were very sort of working class people. They both worked in factories. And even though my older brothers played guitar and they were always listening to music, nobody did it for a living. You know, there was no one in my family that was in the arts of any. So for me, it didn't register as a viable option to make a living. I just had no idea you could do that, really. So again, I was playing trombone at school, then playing bass guitar and double bass. And my trombone teacher at the time sort of said, listen, he said, you're really good on all these instruments. You can read music, you've got very good time and feel, whatever. He said, you could earn money from this if you decide to. And I was really shocked at this. I thought, really? I had no idea. Because at school, the only thing I was any good at was sports. I wasn't a very good academic, but I was always a very good athlete. I loved athletics. I loved basketball. So I thought, if anything, that's where I was going to go. But yeah, so when I left school, my trombone teacher said, first of all, he said, every band needs a bass player, not every band needs a trombonist.
That's great advice.
I'm not telling you to give up the trombone because I know you love playing it. He said, but you will get more work as a bass player. He was like a fixer in the West Midlands. I'm originally from Wolverhampton. So he would book bands or book musicians rather, for sessions and all sorts, So I was doing like sort of TV adverts and radio jingles and stuff like that. So, and yeah, he started giving me work and I just couldn't believe it. I thought, wow, people are giving me money for doing something that I love. What's going on here?
I love that. And you're right that, because we've had more bass players on the Paul Weller Fan podcast than any other profession.
Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so when was it your paths crossed with Jools? Because if I'm right in saying, I think 1987 is when the Jools Holland big band started, but it evolves into this. I mean, I've seen you live a few times and this band, I don't know how many it is now, but is it like a 20-piece orchestra? It's massive.
Yeah. Well, again, my knowledge of Jools was definitely began with Squeeze. I was definitely a Squeeze fan. I remember buying Squeeze records. And I used to watch him on the tube with Paulie Yates. Another way how I learned to play was watching bands on there. But that was it. That was my only knowledge of Jools. So I moved to London in 1988. And the reason I moved was I was a successful musician in and around the Midlands. I wanted to do more diverse stuff. I wanted to play with different musicians. I wanted to play more improvised music. I wanted to be in bands as opposed to being a session guy because I was just always in studios and having to read music as well. And I just wanted to do something a bit more creative. So I moved to London in 88 and started to do lots of jazz gigs and all sorts of different stuff. I ended up working with a saxophone player who'd already got the gig with Jools. And, he came to me one day and sort of said, Jools is looking for a bass player, but he predominantly wants someone who plays double bass. He'd always used bass guitarists in the past. And I said, yeah, sure. But the thing is, this was 1991. So Jools wasn't the Jools Holland that we know and love now because he didn't have a TV show. He didn't have a radio show. He wasn't a particularly household name. So it was a very different time. And I just thought, yeah, I remember Jools from this and that. I said, yeah, I'll come along. So I did the audition at his studio, which is 5 minutes from where I live. And at the end of it, he said to me, there was him and the guitar player and me on double bass. And we just jammed for about an hour. And at the end of it, Jools said, wow, that's really great. He said, but, we do have quite a few people to see. And I remember thinking, well, that sounds a bit of a brush off, if ever I heard it.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I started to pack the bass away. And the thing is, I remember being very nonchalant about this. And I think the reason for that is if I was auditioning for the Jools gig now, there'd be a lot more to gain from having that gig because you'd be very aware of the TV stuff. You know that you'd be doing tours and all that stuff and you'd be playing with very famous people. But back then, none of that existed. So I think that's what helps keeping me very grounded and relaxed about the whole thing. So I'm packing the bass up thinking, yeah, it's whatever, And then he went outside with the guitar player, came back a few minutes later and said, look, the gig's yours. To hell with it, let's just get on with this, And then he said, we'll get you some cassette tapes and we'll, learn some of those songs. And that was it really. So that was in 91. But again, those the first year or so was just very quiet, low key stuff, a couple of like college gigs, polytechnics, summer balls, whatever. Still very, and I thought that was it. I thought we were just going to be a gigging R&B blues band. And bearing in mind at that time, it was a smaller setup. It was only a 9-piece band.
And you weren't getting the big guest stars
no, at all.
You on tour and things, were you?
No. At that very beginning, it was pretty much just Jools and the band, and I think sort of Sam Brown joined us fairly quickly. But yeah, at the very beginning, it was just a band, no guests coming along either at all. But yeah, and it was, and again, I thought that was that. And then in 92, and I don't know how it came about, but Jools got asked to do later with Jools Holland, or it wasn't called that at the time. I think it was called The Late Show or something like that. I think it turned into later with Jools Holland afterwards. But yeah, so that happened in 92. And then the Hootenanny, the New Year's Eve TV show, started in 93. And then all hell broke loose. And I say that in the nicest possible way, because none of were expecting that. None of us in the band, and maybe even Jools himself, saw that coming. And maybe he thought that his TV show with Paul Oates, that maybe he thought, well, that's that. And all of a sudden he gets offered this super cool show. And for us, we'd never been on TV before, or I certainly hadn't. And I hadn't played with those kind of iconic and legendary artists. And all of a sudden, you're just getting these phone calls saying, can you, we've got Eric Clapton, we've got Paul Weller, we've got something, can you come and play with them? It's like, yeah.
I'll think about it.
Oh, yeah. Give me a few minutes. So, yeah, and it was, we were just thrust into the limelight. None of us saw it coming, But, yeah, I mean, thank goodness, because it's been a wonderful 30-year ride ever since. Yeah,
I mean, amazing. And later was, you're right, 8th of October, 1992. And we're nearly 30 years later, as you say, for that show. And it's really now the only TV show that's worth watching for music. And we've missed it. I think we've missed the proper full band experience of that during lockdown, I have to say. I mean, I enjoy the Friday nights they're on at the moment, but it's not the same, is it?
Yeah, it definitely isn't. And I mean, it's a shame for... Yeah, because it was such a great atmosphere in that studio. We used to film it up in BBC Television Centre up in Shepherd's Bush. But for the last 6 or 7 years, maybe longer, it's been down in Maidstone in Kent. They moved the whole thing down there. It's actually better for me, because I'm in southeast London, so it's actually easier to get to Kent than it is to get to the centre.
Travel across town.
but it was just the atmosphere of the place. I mean, I do miss the original television centre, and there was talk before COVID happened of us going back there, because I think the main studios are still there. What was taken over was some of the offices that were turned into apartments. I think some of the studios are still there, so we might end up going back. But yeah, it's... Obviously, Jools has to do it now in his studio, and there's just him and one guest, and you can't have too many people in there. I mean, it was quite remarkable that we did the Hootenanny just gone, because all of our tours have been cancelled, and we thought, well, there's no way we're going to do the New Year's Eve show. But the BBC were quite insistent, and they said, we really want to do this. And I was amazed that it came about, because I thought, well, we're all going to have to travel separately, which is unheard of. We're all going to have to sit miles apart from each other, And then obviously we discovered things like, well, there's going to be no audience, there's going to be no celebrity guests, just every day it was changing. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this is so different. But then again, if you look at those early TV shows, and again, Paul was one of the earliest guests on there, on the Hootenanny ones, and they just look so different to how they are now. They was just like a small, tiny group of people that were just shoved in the corner. And it was all very sort of low key. And like now it's all very glitzy and big sets and hundreds of people. But it's funny how that... So I guess it was because when it first started, they didn't know how popular it was going to be.
But it is, you're right. It's your... I thought the one that just gone was going to be a clip show. I was like, there's no way this is going to be a new performances. And every year, this is a highlight for New Year's Eve that makes you almost not want to leave the house. It's like if somebody invites you to a party, you're like, yeah, but hold on, what about Jools? Are we going to have Jools at the party? Is that going to be on? Is Hootenanny going to be on? Oh, I'll come, that's fine. And there's been some real highlights every year, isn't there?
Yeah, it's odd as well becoming part of an institution, because I remember as a kid watching New Year's Eve, and I think was his name Andy Stewart or something like that, I think it was, and it was some Hogmanay show when you were a kid, some guy in a kilt in a castle up in Scotland.
Yeah.
And that was the thing. That was the New Year's Eve show. And it's kind of so funny to have become part of what came after that, this quite iconic show. It's a very odd thing. And it's especially weird, if you walk down the street and all sort of neighbours and that, saw you get on TV last night, It's the highlight of our New Year's Eve. And it's a very odd feeling.
Yeah, I bet.
In people's homes on that iconic show, really.
Now, when we talk about later, you mentioned Paul was there right from almost from day one. I mean, certainly the July 1993 was his first performance with the stuff off of Wildwood, so Sunflower and Has My Fire Really Gone Out, Steve White on drums, Yolanda Charles on bass, Helen Turner on keys, and then back for a Stanley Road special in 95 with a few songs. I think it was like 4 different songs, even playing like Ocean Colour and Sea. There's a wonderful clip of him with Rico on trombone, bless him, and Jools playing as well, where Ocean Colour Sea are playing Line in Your Pockets, and Weller pops up on piano. So he's there constantly. He loves this show. But the one I want to touch on is 1996, the 4th Hootenanny. And Paul plays, and I can't remember the order because there's only clips now on YouTube of the actual songs rather than the whole show. So I'm not sure what was the first song. I'm not sure if you can remember.
I really can't. It's that long ago. But it was, am I right in thinking, Will It Go Round in Circles? I Forgot to Be Your Lover?
Yep. So Will It Go Round in Circles, which is Billy Preston's song. I Forgot to Be Your Lover, which is a William Bell song. And then Weller also plays with Mick Hucknall and Cassandra Wilson on Come Together, which you're not playing on, because that's Andy Lewis is on bass on that one, I think.
Oh no, I'm shoved at the back still. Oh, right. I was always shoved at the back. No, because I was looking at them the other day. Yeah, Cassandra Wilson, Paul, and Mick Hucknall. Yeah, that's definitely me on Come Together.
Okay, cool.
We just don't get as many good shots on that. Yeah, because it's still Jools' band, so that's still me on there. So.
Yeah, but amazing hootenanny. But one of the lovely things was you get so many unique performances on that edition, if you like, of later. That these very special performances, and I know that you then that's Will It Go Round in Circles was then on a Jools album a couple of years later. I'm not sure if it was the same performance or re-recorded. You'll probably know. But what do you remember about the first time you played with Paul then?
The thing is, like when you're doing the TV show, you don't get to hang with the artist, say as much as when we do an album recording with them. When Paul has done our albums, you definitely get to spend the day with someone and you get to hang out and have a sandwich, whatever. On the TV show, it's very much a conveyor belt of people. So these artists, so we get given the track to learn a day or so before, or a few days. And then, you turn up to the studio, you run through it as a band, and then they bring the artist out, So really that first time I met Paul, he would have just walked onto stage and said like, "Hi guys," and then somebody would have counted the song off, But I just remember thinking it was just so cool, because again, it's always great for me playing with people that one, I really liked or admired, or I aspired to be like, or I bought their records. That's the thing. I mean, there's loads of people that I played with that I'd never heard of before, which is fine, and it's a great discovery. But when you get to work with someone that you grew up following and listening to, and you bought their records and whatever, I mean, that's always a very cool thing.
Yeah.
And Paul is such a cool guy, and it's kind of nice as well, when these artists acknowledge the band, because I mean, sometimes people come out and they're not as warm as they could be, But Paul I remember him always being very appreciative, and he was always saying thanks and that sounds great, guys, and all that kind of stuff, But yeah, I really loved playing Will It Go Round in Circles, because from a bass player's point of view, you can really get your teeth into that, And I think, did you say, was that written by Billy Preston, did you say?
Yeah.
Which is very cool, because I got to play with him too. He was a guest on Jools' show years later, and William Bell was the other writer.
William Bell was the other song, So I Forgot to Be Your Lover,
Yeah. So I've actually played with both of those via the Jools thing, So that's kind of weird.
That's a lovely little connection, isn't it?
Yeah, on the TV thing, because also what happens is once you've rehearsed with someone, then they have to go off and they go back to their dressing room or do whatever. But then you're still there waiting for the next artist to come along. So it's not as though you all break at the same time. So we didn't get really to chat with Paul that much on that day, really. But it was just such a cool thing to finally be playing someone who I'd watched their career as I was growing up, So yeah, very cool guy to play with, man. Really nice. Very appreciative of what we were doing.
Now, I mentioned earlier on another TV show that was a love of mine. So around this time was when I was starting my radio career. Around 1993, I got work experience at the BBC and then eventually a proper job at the BBC. And I was in love, as a radio presenter, in love with Chris Evans. He was who I wanted to be. I had ginger hair, glasses. I looked like Chris. He was on the radio, riding high. I'd been listening to the GLR days and then Radio 1 and all that. And you were there. Don't forget your toothbrush. What a bloody great show that was.
You know what? When you said that earlier on, I honestly, I was going to say, don't forget your toothbrush. And I thought, if I say it, and he kind of goes, no, I mean later with Jools Holland. So I had a 50-50 chance, I'm guessing, with that one.
But that was a big turning point for you with the double bass and the bass guitar, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, actually, again, when I first got the Jools gig, he said to me he just wanted double bass. He didn't want bass guitar at all, even though he'd used bass guitarists in the past. But I guess he thought, this is my own band now. I'm calling the shots. I want to do older stuff, more older R&B blues type stuff. And the upright bass is what was on all those original recordings. And I remember we did, I think the first TV show maybe I did with Jools was, or one of the very first was Amnesty International, way back. I think we filmed it up in Leeds, and we played with, it was Sam Brown, Misha Paris, Rick Astley, Desiree, I think it was very cool. But then I remember thinking, I'm listening to the bass parts that I'm going to have to play with these people, and they were either definitely played on a bass guitar or a keyboard bass, definitely not on an acoustic double bass. And I said, and I bought the bass guitar along, but Jools said, no, everything on upright, And I thought, well, that's cool. I thought it's unusual because I was, as a session musician, I was used to choosing very specific instruments for specific songs. But Jools was insistent that I just used the double bass for everything. And then carrying on from that with Don't Forget Your Toothbrush, the first couple of episodes or whatever, sure enough, I'm playing it there. And then we started to get more and more songs to play with the artist where it was obvious that this wasn't going to work very well on double bass, whether it was technically a lot more difficult or sound-wise, And so at one point I said, I think we had Chaka Khan on as a guest. Now, Chaka Khan is definitely one of my all-time favorites. Absolutely love her. Got all of her albums, And so that was a big deal for me, that show. And she wanted to do Ain't Nobody and I'm Every Woman.
Wow, cool.
Which, I think one of them was definitely played on bass guitar. The other one was probably a synth. Neither were played on double bass. And I said to Jools, I said, look, man, please let me play bass guitar on this. I said, it's going to kill me trying to play it on double bass, and it's just not going to sound great either. And he said something to me at the time quite profound. He said, listen, the reason why, I'm asking you to do this, he said, because he didn't want us to be like a typical generic TV band. There's a lot of house TV bands where they just kind of sound quite similar, or they did in the past, and they just disappear into the song. And he wanted us to still have our identity and our personality as the Jools Holland band. And he thought that part of the personality of the band was me playing double bass on everything, even a pop song. And I said, I totally get that. I said, but we're talking about physicality here. And anyway, long story short, I convinced him. I said, listen, let me use bass guitar on certain things, and I'll use the double bass as much as possible, but I need to use the both things. So that was the start of it. Don't Forget Your Toothbrush was when he finally allowed me to play both.
And also, I guess there's the crossover between later and that show where you're playing with huge, big stars. So I remember, Sandy Shaw, I think Tom Jones was on it. It was Roger Daltrey on one. I actually was in the audience for the episode with Cher, and you can see because Cher reads out my mum's name. For some reason I took my mum. Cher reads out my mum's name, and my mum shat herself thinking that she was about to get dragged up on stage or something. And you can see me with the glasses, the ginger hair, and the Chris Evans copy suit. It's quite tragic, I have to say. But you played with some amazing stars, didn't you?
Well, yeah, it was. I mean, that show was interesting because a lot of people are not aware of it, and a lot of people just remember the wacky game show, crazy aspect of it. But yeah, for us as the house band, every week was a different artist, and we got to play 2 songs every week. And some of the guests on there were as iconic as the ones that were appearing on Jools' more serious later show. So yeah, we definitely had. There was Hugh Cornwell came on there, Barry White came on there, Lulu, Kylie, Chaka Khan. There was some really amazing sort of guests on there, and we were all riding high as a band then because we were all earning more money than we'd ever known before. And I think it was when a lot of us got mortgages for the first time. And it was great working with Chris, actually. He was lots of fun, and I think in between series I got very, very ill. I was in hospital for a while. Him and the production company sent me flowers and a big sort of bowl of fruit and all that kind of stuff. So, really, it was like a very family unit, So, yeah, it was a blast, I'm
going to fast forward to 2006 because this is at the beginning I mentioned these iconic performances that I can't remember how big social media was in 2006, but, if the phrase go viral it was a thing, then that would have been it. Amy Winehouse, the 14th Hootenanny, Weller performs Don't Go to Strangers, the Etta Jones song, and Heard It Through the Grapevine, the Marvin Gaye song. What do you remember about those performances? Because sometimes, to me, it seems like sometimes things just blow up and become something else, and that was one of them. That show was one of them. That was incredible to watch.
I think was that the same year he did on his own? Did he do I Don't Need No Doctor? I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, I mean at this stage, and obviously we've played with Paul a lot now, and people say to me, they say, do you get nervous, on TV shows? I mean, not particularly, because a lot of the people that we're playing with, we've played with them a lot of times, and Paul was one of those guys we've worked with a lot, and also because he's, in my experience, was easy to get along with. Again, we didn't have, and I've never had really long hours conversation with him, but I've always gotten on with him really well. So when you end up playing with these people, it's always cool. I mean, how can you not do it? But at the same time, because if you do it a lot and you do it regularly, it's just something that you become used to, playing with these iconic people on a regular basis. But it's always been a pleasure working with Paul, and I do love his voice. I love the way he's reinvented himself, gone on to do different things, and so that year with Amy, that was really special, because also we played with her. She'd done the Hootenanny way back before she adopted the image that she had at the time. I think she'd done a standard years prior to that. I think it was Teach Me Tonight we'd done with her before that. And then she'd done the radio show. So I think this was that appearance with her and Paul was the last time we worked with her. And it was, and again, I'm always a big fan of hers. I thought she was amazing, so unique, such a one-off. So to get these two together, Heard It Through the Grapevine is such an iconic song as well. It's such a great thing to play. And so that was stunning. And also, I'm a big jazz fan. Probably my record collection, there's more jazz in it than anything else, So obviously, Don't Go to Strangers is an old standard, So playing those songs with these two icons, I just thought it just doesn't get any better than this. This is as good as it gets. It was stunning.
And you can see actually on the Hootenanny when you're watching, there's a bit in that Don't Go to Strangers where Paul and Jools catch eyes, and you can tell that they're thinking, "This is special. This is great."
Oh yeah, and she, what I would say about that is obviously Amy was at that stage, I think it was, things had changed. And if you watch that the performance when she sang with us,
worlds apart, isn't it? Yeah,
and she's bright and she's smiling and super happy. And when she did that show, when she was duetting with Paul, things were very different. She looked very distant. She behaved quite similarly. It's like she wasn't almost there. But then again, she was like she was a little bit disengaged. But then when she performed, when that voice came out, oh my goodness, she was as good as she's ever been, So, and I think she enjoyed it. I think she really loved doing it, But I think she was probably having some difficulty really expressing herself because whatever was going on in her private life. But I think musically, because I think otherwise she wouldn't have been able to have done that performance, and she sounded great on all those songs, as did Paul.
And that song was on the album The Golden Age of Song in 2012, but different versions. So you used her vocal that you re-recorded, is that right?
So this was a very unique situation. Nothing like this had ever happened before. So we'd done the Hootenanny, and Jools' record company at the time, so we're doing that album The Golden Age of Song, and they sort of said, listen, we really want to use that version of it. We want to make some changes. And also we all talked about this, and I talked about it with Jools, and Paul got involved as well. And the first of all, the major change that the record company wanted to do is, if you listen to that song on the Hootenanny, Paul starts the song off. He sings the first section, and then Amy comes in, and then they alternate. But I think the record company said, we want the song to start with Amy. The first voice you want to hear it is this. And I guess because she was no longer with us, and she was this icon. So they sort of said, we specifically want her to start it off, And it was weird because so straight away, if you snip the Paul section from the beginning, it kind of puts the sequence of the song slightly out of kilter. Now, most people wouldn't.
I hadn't noticed that, no.
But like a lot of jazz songs, they have certain forms, they have two A sections and then a B section and then another A section. So this is kind of like just one A section, and so it's slightly disjointed, but only like a muso, or particularly a jazz muso, would clock that. But I listened to it again before we started this, and it's absolutely fine. It doesn't sound wrong or horrible. But the main thing was that her voice is the first thing that you hear. So that was the first thing. And then we all spoke to each other, and we said, well, look, if we're doing this, if really we could just isolate her vocal, and we could redo a lot of things. So, for instance, there were some technical difficulties on that show. I think there might have been some tuning issues with certain sections. I won't go into detail. For some reason, I played bass guitar, which for the other songs was great, but I think Don't Go to Strangers should have been upright bass. And I don't know whether it was just out of laziness, I'm not sure. But I just thought, okay, if we're going to redo this, let me redo my bass part and let me play my double bass on there, because it will sound better, sound more authentic. And then all of a sudden, everyone starts to come forward. I want to redo my thing. And Paul in particular, he was very keen to redo his vocal. He wasn't happy with his performance, his vocal performance on the Hootenanny. And he definitely said, well, listen, this is great news because I want to do the voice again. And I think, and that's fair enough because, on the TV show, because it's a party show. There's a lot of stuff kind of going on, and you're very aware that you're there as entertainment, more so than making groundbreaking, iconic recordings. That's not in your mind. It's more, we're having a party, we need to entertain everybody. So you might not as be fastidious with your performance as if you were in a studio doing an album. So that was the beauty of redoing that with Amy's voice, was because we all got to do everything again on the instruments that wanted to do them. We corrected everything, and it's great. It was the weirdest thing though, going back to Jools' studio. I remember being there on my own with my double bass and the microphones there, and just the playback coming through, and just hearing Amy's voice through my headphones. I think it was a click track, and it was kind of weird because obviously you get goosebumps because she was no longer with us, and but I think for all of us, it made it a more of an emotional recording. There was a lot more poignancy there now because she'd gone. So I think everyone stepped up, and it's definitely a superior recording of that song. Still with her original vocal, but it's still nice to watch the video as well with all its flaws.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the same album that had the September in the Rain, which is
that's right,
Dinah Washington. Is that right?
Yeah, who is one of my, because my wife's a professional jazz singer, so she's a big fan of her. Actually, but so Paul came to Jools' studio to record that, and that was, again, those are the days that you really get to hang out with people and you have a lot of fun with them, and I've got a couple of really nice photographs of Paul and myself from that recording. There's one of us actually standing at the mixing desk, and we're both standing there listening to the playback, deep in concentration, and then when we realized it was all fine, we had a nice more smiley picture outside because we were relaxing. But one thing that I do remember from that day is when we were running through the takes of September in the Rain, I couldn't believe how amazing he sounded. I couldn't believe his voice on that because, I knew what he sounded like with the jam and the style council, all the other things he did. But all of a sudden, I'm hearing this crooner, this jazz crooner. And honestly, and this wasn't being sycophantic, because you have to be careful when you play with these great people that, you've got to be friendly to them, you've got to be respectful, but you can't be too sycophantic with them because, but if you genuinely feel something, you should say it. And I said, listen, that sounds amazing. I said, you sound like Nat King Cole. I actually said to him, you sound like that. I said, where does that voice come from, man? Where did you get to sing like that? And he's got this beautiful vibrato and this rich velvet sound. I'm thinking, man alive, how does this guy do this?
I've read things more recently where he's talked about being more in control of his voice, but also using it more as an instrument and seeing it that way. And you can definitely hear that the last few albums. There's so many different vocal techniques he's playing to the song where sometimes it might sound a bit like Bowie and, like you say, some are high. It's an incredible thing to be able to be doing that 40 years on,
Absolutely. I said to him, listen, you should do an album of standards. I said, you really should with a voice like that. Because I'd never heard him sing like that before. Really, and it's beautiful. Again, I listened to it briefly before we started to chat, and I just, wow, it's incredible. But I love when people reinvent themselves like that, and I think it's really refreshing and it's really inspiring, and I think it's important for artists to do.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was watching the Later in Lockdown show a few weeks back with Tom Jones, and he's somebody I know you've obviously played with, and actually him and Paul duetted on one of the Hootenannies with a Ray Charles song, which was with Weller's band. I don't know if you were pushed into the background on that one or not.
Oh no, it was definitely the other end of the studio.
Yeah. But again, he was talking about he's got a new album out and was still recording original material, and I think that's just remarkable. He's 80. I mean, Paul's in his 60s now, but to still be writing new material or working with writers on new stuff, not just banging out the classics and the back catalogue, is remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, he's definitely one of my favorites. Because again, a kid growing up in the 70s, he was on TV all the time, whether it was his own TV show, whether it was on Morecambe and Wise. So getting to play with him was cool. In fact, we did an album with Tom Jones, a whole album with him, with Jools' band, and it was my mom's birthday during the recording of it. And obviously, Mom, loved Tom Jones and grew up with him. And so I was surprised. I said to him, Tom, do you mind if I call my mom, could you just say happy birthday to her? And he said, sure. He said, what's the name? I said, it's Joan. Joan, okay. He's got a Welsh accent, take it. Anyway, I said, oh, hi, Mom. I said, happy birthday. I said, there's someone that wants to say hello to you. And I passed the phone over, and he's kind of going, hello, Joan. Joan, it's Tom. And then his face kind of, he kind of goes, it's Tom Jones, singer, Welsh singer, Tom Jones. And I'm kind of going, what is going on here? And he said, anyway, love, have a great birthday. Lots of love, And apparently my mum had kind of gone, Tom who? I don't know any Tom. Who's this? And of course, I should have preempted it. I should have said to her, Mom, I'm going to put Tom Jones on there. Yeah. But I wanted it to be a surprise. But he's kind of going, hello, it's Tom. And she's kind of going, no, don't know any Tom. No.
Now, I have to say, on your website, there's a list of artists you've played with, and we've not got time on this podcast. This will be an hour-long episode alone just to read the names. But
we don't want to bore everybody.
No, but is there anybody you haven't played with that you would like to? Because that list is incredible from everybody from, I'm trying to think of from Adele to Paul Simon, George Harrison, Van Morrison. Everybody's on this list, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, it was great because we've actually played with 3 of the Beatles and 2 of the Rolling Stones, which I guess isn't too shabby. But yeah, and actually that list, there's loads missing of it. But I got to a point where I just couldn't be bothered to keep adding the names. Yeah. And also I'm thinking, well, no one's going to just sit there and go through hundreds and hundreds of names. So, but there are a lot missing from it. I've been asked this a lot lately about who I'd love to play with, and actually there aren't that many. And I don't say that in any kind of flippant or glib way, but I genuinely have played.
Well, they've all been on. Yeah, you've played them all.
My personal hero, people like some of my own heroes, like Chaka Khan, George Benson, Al Jarreau, Smokey Robinson, Paul Simon, as you said. These for me were like big favourites. I've got all their albums and stuff. But I suppose the ones that I haven't played with, I definitely would love to play with Stevie Wonder. That would be really great, and I'd be very, very happy there. And Joni Mitchell as well. I'd love to play with her. And I know she's not been in the best of health. But and it's funny because my brothers used to listen to Joni Mitchell when I was a kid, but the early stuff. But I started to listen to her much later on when she was working more with jazz musicians.
I think Stevie Wonder's got some new material coming out, or a new album this year. So, let's get back to some laters where you can get in the studio, and that has to happen. That has to happen, man. That has to happen.
Those 2, I would, if I could add those 2 to my CV, I would definitely be very happy. But I'm also still very happy the way things are.
Well, fingers crossed you guys can get back out on the road. I know there are some dates, I think, for tail end of the year, I think I'm right in saying, for the Rhythm and Blues Orchestra with Jools, because that band is remarkable. The singers and the stars. I mean, I loved Sam Brown when she was with you. I think the tour this time round, as Leo said, Chris Difford, who I'm actually talking to at 2:00 this afternoon. It's always a great night out coming to see you guys.
Oh, bless. Yeah, well, funnily enough, really quickly, I did do one gig with Squeeze. I was an honorary member for one evening back in 98. They did a New Year's Eve gig and their bass player couldn't make it. So I had to step in, but they didn't send me the tapes until the night before the gig. And I had to learn like 25 Squeeze songs, which are not easy to learn. They're not really simple tunes. And also I had a stomach bug and I was really ill that night. I was most of the night sort of vomiting violently. And I thought the next day I've got this one gig with Squeeze, but I managed to battle through, but it wasn't easy. I had to stay up all night learning those Squeeze songs, but it was worth it. It was great to do. But yeah, the Jools thing, hopefully the winter tour, the autumn winter tour will happen. And I'm assuming, because we've just done the Hootenanny in the midst of lockdown, I'm assuming there's no reason why we won't be doing the next one. So yeah, I think we're all champing at the bit to get out there on the road again.
Yeah, I bet. Well, fingers crossed. I have a couple of final questions for you, and this has been an absolute delight, Dave, I have to say. You are allowed one Paul Weller song for the rest of your life. Which one's it going to be? It can be the Jam the Style Council or solo. And you know what? As it's you, it can be a collaboration either from live on Later or from album with Jools. So what are you going to pick? One track.
So hang on, does it have to be one that he's written or?
No. Just he can playing just piano on it for all I care. That's fine. You're allowed whatever.
If I had to pick one, I'm just trying to think of the one that I had the most fun with, and it was probably really was Will It Go Round in Circles? Because that was. And I thought he sounded great on that, both on the TV version and on the album. And for me as a bass player, it's a very cool line to play, So yeah, if I had to listen to one Paul Weller song forever, it would be him singing that song. the band sounded great on it. You know, the horn section is a great horn part as well. But I think that was, but then, you know, the evening with him and Amy, I think was definitely very emotional. It's a very moving thing. But I just think just out and out kind of rocking out, that the version we did with him, Will It Go in a Circle, was my favourite performance, I think.
You all look so bloody cool as well. I mean, he always looks cool. But that band, when you watch that band, and I'll share the link with the podcast, you guys look like, you're having such fun playing that song, but you all look pretty dapper and pretty cool, I have to say.
Oh, yeah. Oh, bless you.
Now, the purpose of this podcast, as well as talking to lovely people like yourself, is to get a meeting with Paul, to be able to have a conversation, the conversation I never managed to have in my radio career that I gave up 10 years ago, with that one regret that I never got to interview Paul. If it happens, what should I chat to him about? Is there a killer question or a topic that you reckon we should cover off?
Well, I think you should ask him, how is it playing with bassist Dave Swift? I think that would be...
He's actually, this has come up quite a lot on the podcast around that. No, not playing with you, but just the fact that he's actually a very good bass player himself. So when he started the Jam from day one, he was the bass player in the Jam. So with the Style Council, some of the honorary councillors would play live, but actually on record, it would be Weller on the bass guitar. So is there a bit competitive nature between the two of you?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you should probably ask him, because like I said, when he did September in the Rain, and like I said, he did sound like an old style crooner to me. You know, I really did. And I did think of Nat King Cole, you know, I was being genuine. But, yeah, you should sort of, ask him why he hasn't done an album of standards. But he might punch me for asking that question, but I don't know. But I don't know, he did such a good job of it. He did such a brilliant job, yeah. Now, I know there's a lot of pop stars that have done the jazz big band thing. Maybe one of the reasons why he hasn't is because he just didn't want to be...
Yeah, as soon as Robbie Williams did it killed off the genre for him.
Yeah, and I think Rod Stewart did one as well, didn't he? Which I didn't hear. But actually, I think out of all of them, I think sort of Paul would probably be the one most suited to it, from what I remember from his voice, because it sounded really old school. It sounded from that era. I thought it was beautiful. So yeah, ask him why he's not done one of those.
Dave, this has been brilliant. Thank you so much for your time. Fingers crossed you can get back out on the road soon. We'd love to see you all live. I know that. But yeah, thanks so much for your time. I've loved every second of this.
That's been mine. Thank you.
My thanks once again to Dave Swift, another brilliant guest. Check out my show notes for all the links to find the songs and the performances that we talked about. Next time around, I'm joined by the General, trumpet player Steve Trigg, who has performed and arranged with Paul Weller in recent years. We're talking Stone Foundation, DC Fontana, Pee Wee Ellis, and much, much more. So many stories to share with you on the next episode of the podcast. If you've enjoyed this one, then please share on your social media channels. Tag a Weller-loving mate in as well. You can also buy me a coffee and leave a review. Find out more in my show notes. Get in touch on Twitter @WellerFanPod or on Instagram and Facebook. It's Paul Weller Fan Podcast. I'll see you next time.